So at this point, I'd like to welcome to the stage David Hawig of the Web3 Foundation. David has worked previously as a part of his own startup on grants for various foundations in the blockchain ecosystem and is leading the Web3 Foundation grants since 2019. And today he's going to talk to us about the Web3 grants and the future of public goods funding. How you doing, David?
Hey, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So yeah, don't mind sharing your screen if you have some slides, and then I can leave the stage to you.
Right.
All yours, David.
Perfect. Then let's start from the beginning. So yeah, the title of the presentation is Web3 Grants and the Future of Public Goods Funding. So first, a small advertisement block basically about our grants program and also to tell you a little bit more about it and my background. And then at the end, hopefully, this will kickstart some discussion and I will give a little bit my own opinion about the future of public goods funding. So you might have seen these slides more or less before. Last year, I already introduced the grants program here. So nevertheless, I just want to give a quick introduction about it. So what does our grants program generally do? We focus on funding open source software development and research efforts related to Polkadot, Kusama, and Substrate. Obviously, because we did the token sales for these networks and this technology, we focus on this. But as long as it's somehow helpful for our ecosystem, we are basically interested in it. What's unique about our grants program is that everything is public on GitHub, and this is literally everything. So from the application, the approval, the delivery, you can see everything on GitHub, and this is on purpose. So the idea behind it originally was to have this kind of playing field for on-chain mechanisms, because we also have the treasury. I'm also going to talk a little bit about this with one slide, but we want to play around. We want to see what works, what doesn't work, and using GitHub for this is a great tool and a great way to do it for us without immediately losing the complete control. This also puts, I would say, a lot of pressure on the team, because you can see if someone disagrees for the wrong reason or does a bad job with the evaluation or something like this. But on the other hand, it's also really beneficial because, for example, VCs can immediately see how do teams perform, what are they doing. So it's used a lot for these kinds of purposes. On the other hand, you can actually also see that we are spending the money and we are working together with teams and try to help them. And it's not like we just have promised, I don't know, 1 billion in funding and no one ever is going to receive this. Just a few statistics. So far, we gave away roughly 12 million in total value, received more than 600, I believe even 700 applications by now, and signed more than 300 projects. And they are basically from all over the world. And you can already see by the statistics, we are usually focused on smaller grants and not so much of big teams and big projects. And just to mention it, we are also hiring. So feel free to look at our website and feel free to apply. So what are we looking for? Just to give a few examples, the ideal grant is usually an early stage startup that wants to develop a proof of concept or something similar that is currently missing in our ecosystem. And teams actually are motivated to work on it by their own. And it's not like they want to cover 100% of their early stage funding. They just want to get started, see if it works or if it actually makes sense, and we give them a little bit of money to play around with it. From my experience, these are the best grants, because then you have someone really working on it, and he is not just doing it, he or she is not just doing it for the money. Apart from this, we obviously also support all kinds of public goods in our ecosystem and development and maintenance there. Usually there we see a lot of applications that combine this to a certain degree. So if you develop a certain chain, you are working, you need a Go RPC client or something like this, then you basically can apply for these public infrastructure to get it funded via our grants program. And another great example is obviously Gosama, the Go Polkadot host implementation by ChainSafe. Apart from this, we are also always looking for research, but it's actually hard to find people that want just do proper research and not like looking for funding for working on their economic token model or something like this for the white paper. Another benefit of our grants program, and that it's fully open source, is actually that we try to decentralize it a little bit. So we everyone can make suggestions for RFPs or grants. So an example is usually Team X is working on something, doesn't have the resources to work on specific parts, but still they need it, then they can create an RFP for it, or simply open an issue in our grants repository, and we will try to write up an RFP for it and also try to find teams that are interested on working on this problem. And we, apart from this, we are also always looking for external evaluations. So theoretically, anyone can evaluate the deliveries and actually look into them, see if it's running, if it makes sense according to the contract. But usually we are also quite flexible when it comes to the contract itself. So as long as a team actually wants to work on something and they put effort into it, then we are also open to amending these contracts. So we integrate this external evaluation system also to let other people contribute to the grants process itself. And the idea was always to expand this and maybe have a rating system behind it. And if you actually contributed a couple of times, then you have the right to also approve grants or contribute to the application process and things like this. But actually, at the moment, very few people are interested in this external evaluation, because I guess everyone who's not a bit knowledgeable wants to work on their own projects. Other than that, in our ecosystem, as I already mentioned, we also have the Onchain Treasury on Polkadot and Kusama, but also now on more and more parachains that have similar mechanisms implemented. And this is basically funded through transaction fees, slashing events, staking inefficiencies, and things like this. And also para threads once they are implemented. And this is basically an on-chain pot of funds that can be used to support the ecosystem and keep it growing. And I think last time I checked, this was combined roughly 1 billion in available funding. So we are always looking also for teams to apply there and work on projects. And there are different mechanisms how the on-chain council currently can spend this money, either on large projects, on smaller contributions. So this is a tips mechanism there, where you can basically, if you find something really interesting that someone done, so basically kind of retrospective public goods funding here. You can open a tip and support this person or this team. And then there's also the bounty mechanism that we implemented about 1 year ago that actually works similar to the grants program. You also have a curator there and someone who actually takes care of the project and also evaluates the deliveries. That's the reason for this is basically currently we have this very small council with only 19 seats. We still want to expand it or actually want to change the whole setup to make it more decentralized. And obviously not everyone has the time to look into all the projects, be part of the council, working on other things as well. So they are basically with curators, you can outsource this work to someone else. You give this person or this multi-sig, it could also be a multi-sig, you trust them and you say, hey, here you have the amount of X to find someone working on problem Y. And we have multiple UIs now in the ecosystem for our on-chain funding mechanisms. Just to mention a few here, Polka Assembly, .Treasury, Commonwealth is also one that I have forgot to add here. So this was a very quick overview of our grants program, and maybe I should quickly also check if we already have questions about the grants program. No, so then I will continue with the talking about the outlook, and maybe we can use this also for discussion. So I guess the biggest goal is that which we all agree to, or most of us here, is that we want to decentralize the funding of public goods. We don't want to have a single entity responsible for it, because if you're running a blockchain or you decentralize your ecosystem, then you want to ideally decentralize all components of it, because if you depend on a centralized entity, then this might cause issues in the long run, especially for funding public goods. And what are, in my opinion, some of the problems we currently see in this ecosystem or in the decentralized funding is basically the biggest problem. I think it was already mentioned during the previous call, is participation. Basically, there are so many interesting things going on. There are so many projects, and everyone needs to somehow convince people to actually participate, and also to incentivize people to participate. And we see this in multiple ecosystems, that if you are just a token holder and theoretically you depend a lot on the decisions, you still don't care, and you just I don't know, some people have their tokens on an exchange and just look at the price, and they don't really care about decisions of a DAO or whatever. Then there's always the problem of time, and also how do you marketing and advertise things, but also education. Another problem that we see commonly is actually the UI, UX. It's still hard for people to actually use this, at least when I ask my friends and family about blockchain, then they are scared of dealing with their own private key, using interfaces, interacting with it. They don't trust themselves necessarily, and things like this. Then there's also, already to mention it again, basically education is a huge part of it. People need to learn about it and need to get educated on topics and to make the right decisions. And maybe to mention it here, these are not only problems of decentralized funding. of public goods. It's also a problem that we have in democracy as well at the moment. So no one has time, no one, or a lot of people don't care, they don't educate themselves about the decisions and things like this. The advantage we have compared to the real world, I would say, is that we can test a lot of things and improve it fairly quickly. And then to mention another problem that we are specifically looking into is are the regulatory risks. So even if it's decentralized to a certain degree, there are still a lot of regulatory risks that might come up in the future and are currently also discussed. So for example, we have at the moment this council member system where people actually vote for a specific council members that are then able to make these decisions. But as it seems, these people that are part of the council and potentially identifiable might in the future be sued for their decisions that they made as part of this council. So that's something we also want to change and need to take into consideration. And then there are other reasons. Usually if you interact with the on-chain treasury and things like this, and you receive the funding in cryptocurrencies, and some people might not be allowed to receive this payment actually, and things like this. So we want to also circumvent these risks and include as many people in the decision process as possible and not depend on too many legal restrictions. A noteworthy exception here, which at least in our ecosystem, I believe is not a problem, is it's hard to get funding for public goods. So I see the problem, at least in the current market, more in it's so easy to get funding from VCs for projects that promise something good, so that no one is really interested in working on public goods. But we, or basically I see this with a lot of projects at the moment, we are constantly looking for good teams that want to work on public goods projects, want to support the infrastructure and develop the infrastructure, and we are also willing to pay for it, but it's just difficult to find the resources and the people for this, because the VC market is so crazy, I would say, at the moment. Then I will quickly go explain some solutions that I think might be possible solutions in the future. So in general, what we see in our ecosystem, at least with already different parachain projects, is this kind of separation of powers and specialization we also know from the real world already. So obviously, if you have just one council, for example, that makes all the decisions, then they theoretically need to know everything and need to be available all the time. They need to make, on the one hand, decisions about, I don't know, art projects, and on the other hand, deep dive into technical proposals and things like this, which is obviously very difficult. And what we see now more and more is actually that there are different kind of councils or different setups for different projects. Like you have specifically a DeFi focused council or DeFi focused decision-making process, whatever this is, quadratic funding, or, and you can basically, on the other hand, if you don't want to be involved in certain decisions, you can delegate your vote to others that feel capable of doing this. And the advantage of liquid democracy or delegate voting is also that it circumvents some of the regulatory risks, and if implemented in the correct way, makes it also easier to to participate and to actually contribute in a useful way. Then one thing I also like to mention here is that I think it's reasonable to still learn from all the decision-making process we had in the past and the democracy, how it works today and so on, and not just ignore it because it also doesn't work, but we also made some good choices, do history, and we should learn from this. And last but not least, I think one big topic that is brought up already to a certain degree, but not a lot of people focus on it, is continuously improve the UI, UX. There's so much potential there. We have, for example, in our ecosystem, we have integrated social recovery mechanisms so that you no longer need to deal with private keys and things like this, but very few teams actually focus on this at the moment. And I think this will potentially evolve over time because currently everyone is working on the lower levels of the tech stack. So this might change in the future. And that's it from my side.
Awesome. Thank you, David. It's always nice to get a little bit more insight into the Web3 grant program.
Thanks.
Yeah, we have a few questions if you got the time to stick around and answer them.
Yeah, sounds good.
The first one is, can white papers associated with Web3 projects be considered peer research? Or
yes. So yes, they can. As long as they actually contain some research aspects. And we are actually really interested in all kinds of projects that try to do something else and try to actually do some research. And it's not like I mentioned, like, hey, we want to release our token. What's the best way to do it? Or something like this.
For sure. Something that actually contributes some novel, maybe research or innovation to the space.
And I'm always really excited when I see a project that simply wants to do something else. Like recently we had this project that wanted to use the Google algorithm for an on-chain mechanisms for social system, and that's simply great.
Yeah.
Try something, test it, and see if it works. And I think in this space, it's easy to also get the funding for it at the moment. So yeah, I encourage everyone to work on something new.
Definitely. The next question is, for the 1 billion available in funding, that's across Web3, Polkadot / Kusama.
That's the Polkadot plus the Kusama Treasury, roughly, last time I checked. So there is, feel free to apply. Because it's actually burnt. If it's not used, it's burnt, and that's definitely not what we want.
Definitely, yeah. So another question, again from Kate Withers, is, with these governance seats and decisions and the need, are you talking about Web3 Foundation or Polkadot / Kusama, all Web3 Foundation projects?
So the on-chain mechanism will change. So our research team is currently working on this to update the governance process. We want no longer to have this single council, but we want to actually make it more inclusive and more decentralized, and are always looking for mechanisms to improve this. But yeah, as I said already, we are also interested in improving our own grants program. And actually, the idea was always to get rid of us. Basically, we don't want to rely. Yeah, we don't want to rely on the Web3 Foundation as the single funding mechanism and decision-making entity. Yeah,
for sure. Definitely a noble goal. But yeah, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us today, David, and for sticking around for a few questions. And Yeah, if you are available to stick around in case, actually, do you want to, is there any inbound communications that you'd like to share with people if somebody would like to get in touch with you in regards? I
It's
guess
actually on the slide I'm just
perfect,
sharing
perfect,
right now,
perfect.
so feel free to reach out, but also feel free to contact me on Twitter or in any other way.
And do you have do you want to throw your Twitter handle in the chat for everybody?
Yeah, I will share it. But yeah, and thanks for having me.
Of course, that's always nice to have you. Sweet, thanks, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, so